The Basketball Hall of Fame 60 Days of Summer is your chance to see your favorite basketball stars live and in person. Check hoophall.com for a complete list of all these exciting appearances and plan your trip today.
Thanks. What a joy to see you again. Welcome home.
Thanks, Paul. I must say, I'm still pinching myself that I got inducted into the Hall of Fame. And every time I come here, not only do I enjoy the process, but it sends chills down my spine. And I can't tell you how privileged and honored I feel to be here. And I see Jim there. And thank you folks for coming out, particularly with the weather. Thank you so much.
Well, you know, I mentioned in my introduction, we can define you, that keyword champion, but I want to start with a different word, which strikes me as so really important part of your life, which is family. Could you begin by telling us a little bit about your mom and dad, who were clearly remarkable people?
Well, I feel they were remarkable people. Fortunately, I had both parents, and I was the third of 4 children growing up. I had 2 older sisters and a younger brother, and my parents were disciplinarians. My father was a preacher, a Baptist preacher, and he had 2 rules: that we respect our mom, his wife, and that we go to church when we're supposed to go be there. And as long as we did that, he was pretty liberal. They both encouraged and enforced getting a good education, and my sisters kind of set the bar pretty high. They were good students, and everyone liked them, and one of them sang in the choir, and they were involved in music and student activities and stuff. So for me and my brother, I had a younger brother, they kind of set the bar pretty high, and so we did our best to keep up. My mom was also involved in the PTA after work, so I couldn't act a fool in school, because she'd hear about it. And as you know, growing up during that time, the neighbors kind of watched over everyone too. So,
absolutely. Your dad was, I guess, other than being a preacher, he was also a pretty good athlete.
Yeah, he was. He really loved baseball.
Semi-pro baseball player.
Yeah, semi-pro in the Negro leagues. He really was fond of baseball, and he loved pitching to my brother and I, throwing his curveballs and fastballs.
Then you loved baseball too as a child, from what I remember.
I did, yeah. At one time, Paul, I had every baseball card of every active player, and I don't have it now. I wish I would have known what I had when I had it, but at that time. And I mean, I like basketball too. I've always liked basketball, but I think it was my dad's influence that really made me love baseball so much.
And your mom, easygoing about education, no problems, how you did well in school or whatever? She was very relaxed and laid back about such things?
Well, I wouldn't say relaxed and laid back. She was a fun lady. She was quite a pistol, but she could make herself real clear. And when she did, we knew it was better to pay attention.
I remember you told me a story that once you came home with what you thought was a good report card, and she perhaps had a different opinion of things.
Yeah, I had gotten 4 A's and 3 C's, and a lot of my friends at the time had, done much worse. So I thought I was doing pretty good, and I came home, and I was out playing in the backyard, and she called me in and said, "Do you like playing basketball?" Mm-hmm. And I looked at her incredulously, like, of course, and she said, "Well, you're gonna have to do better than this," and she made it real clear that it was a privilege, not an entitlement, to be able to participate in sports. And I really resented it at the time, but years later, I was really glad that, she was concerned enough to make it real clear to me.
Absolutely. You mentioned your sisters. I gather that one of your sisters in particular was a really tremendous athlete, tremendous basketball player, and probably gave you some tussles early on in backyard basketball.
That's right. Actually, in our neighborhood, my oldest sister was kind of, prim and prissy.
Yeah.
But the one closest to me was a tomboy, and so she was the best player in our neighborhood for years, and I could never beat her. And we had some pretty good players too, and I remember when I finally did beat her, I think I was 13, 14 years old, and we got into this ugly fight afterward, and I busted her nose. And then we hugged and kissed and made up. And so she accepted that I was turning from a boy into a young man, but she didn't like the old rules.
No.
You know, the women's rules used to be kind of strange. You couldn't only go certain places on the court. She never liked that. So I credit her with, and she was a real role model for my life outside of my parents, because she was a self-starter. I mean, she would teach herself the computer, teach herself Spanish. And I always admired that about her, that she could just do things and was a self-starter.
Yeah, it sounds kind of like Cheryl Miller and Reggie Miller had the same thing. He couldn't wait till he could finally compete against his sister and had a chance to win because she was so great.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little about your basketball family, a gentleman who I know is important in your life. I'd love you to tell us a little about Coach Swanson, who he was in your life.
Yeah, Coach Bob Swanson. I met him when I was 8 or 9 years old. I grew up in California in a small coastal beach town, Ventura, and high school basketball was really big in this town. And so every Saturday, a bunch of us younger guys would go out there and hope the coach might see us. He came over to me one day and he said, "Hey, son, you're pretty good. Can you use your left hand?" And that was the first time I ever thought about, skills basketball-wise. And he became a friend, a family friend, to the point that my senior year of high school, my dad had accepted another church in a neighboring town in the same conference that my high school was in. And the plan was for me to stay at Ventura High School and graduate, because I had been in Ventura since second grade and had made a lot of friends and was voted student body president, and we were supposed to be really good my senior year. Well, to make a long story short, I got cold feet and I decided to make the switch, which for me as a 16-year-old kid was a huge decision. And fortunately for me, it worked out okay. But my point was, when I called Coach Swanson to tell him that, this isn't going to work out, I'm going to go up with my family, and I'll see you when we play against you. And it was like he was expecting my call. There was no remorse. He didn't make me feel guilty at all. And I've thought about that over the years, given the pressure these coaches are under to win in high school, how fortunate I was. And to this day, I mean, I can call him or he'll call me about something. But I stay pretty close to him, and he was just his thing was, Paul, that he would tell our team, when we win, you guys won. When we lose, I lost it. I mean, that's rare. And so to play for, and this is pre-Wooden, I mean, to have an influence like that in my life was just really cool.
Absolutely. And then, you mentioned then you go from Coach Swanson, a quick stop at one other coach, but then you go on to the legendary Coach John Wooden, who obviously not only affected your life so positively, but so many young men over the years. Can you talk a little about it, especially for some of the younger folks who might have heard of John Wooden but don't really know who he was or what he meant? A little bit about Coach.
Yes, sir. I can't say enough about Coach Wooden and the influence he had on my life and the lives of everyone he came in touch with. As brilliant of a basketball coach as he was, and I'm biased, but you can make an argument he's the greatest college coach ever. And there's some great college coaches, so wherever you're from, don't get upset with me, but he was an even finer person. And what I mean by that, he was an English teacher by training, and he saw himself as a teacher first, and he was a Christian man, meaning he didn't talk about it a lot, but he acted it. And it was always remarkable to me, Paul, how a man from Martinsville, Indiana, could thrive in Los Angeles, California.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was just mind-boggling to me. And then at the times, there was a lot of social unrest and challenges, civil rights, Vietnam War, and he was just so remarkably consistent and humble. But he was a competitor. I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah, he wanted to win, and he could be very feisty if you got on his bad side. I never heard him swear in 3 years of being with them, or since. His pet saying was, "Goodness gracious sakes alive," and depending on how he said it, you knew if you were in his doghouse or not. But he was very intense, very competitive. Everything was repetition. Our practices were not long and drawn out. But and Paul, you asked a great question. The things he said on the basketball court translated to life challenges years later. And we weren't concerned I wasn't concerned about that at the time I was playing for him. I was just trying to compete for minutes, get through school, keep my grades up. But every year, the first day of practice, he would show us how to put on our shoes and socks. Now, I haven't had any other coach before or since show me how to put on my socks and shoes. Put on your socks, smooth them out so you don't get wrinkles, your shoes snug. My point is, his attention to detail was just phenomenal. And not just attention to detail, but attention to detail with a sense of urgency. He would go through this pyramid of success for about 30 minutes, and we'd all just kind of sit there, but then throughout the season, he had all these sayings, such as "be quick but don't hurry." And I saw one up there, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. Things turn out best for those who make the best of the way things turn out. We don't want activity. Just all these sayings that you think about relate to basketball, but then years later, they come back at you. And you say, oh, yeah, okay, and you apply it to this, your family, your work, your business, whatever. He was just, and we knew we were playing for a coaching icon.
Sure.
He'd already won multiple championships by the time I got there. But I didn't realize I was playing for a national treasure.
But of course, and again, for the young folks, you should look upstairs at some of the information about Coach Wooden, who is now with Tommy Heinsohn this year going into the Hall of Fame for the second time as a coach and a player. Coach Wooden is one of 4 people who's in the Hall of Fame as both a coach and a player from his earlier days. But you won 85 games in a row, 88 games in a row. 88 in a row, and you won championship after championship. You came in at the kind of the peak of that run. I wonder, one of the other things I've often heard about Coach was how cool he seemed to be during the game. That it was just like, the work had been done in practice. Here we are. We're gonna do what we do, and we're gonna win. We're not changing depending on who we play. We're just gonna roll. Did that affect the team? Did you have a confidence from that kind of style that he brought to the bench? He was not a screamer, not a yeller, not anything.
You're absolutely correct, Paul. He had us so prepared in practice that we're just going to roll with it, and we're going to focus on doing what we do, not only good, but continually better, getting better. And he created this environment or this atmosphere, or what I refer to as a bubble, that once it got going, it just fed on itself. And he restricted the media access to us so we didn't hear all the noise, outside noise. And he was just I just can't describe just how brilliant of a basketball person and coach he was. And he also liked poetry. He wrote poetry and he liked poetry, which you think being a high-profile, successful coach, you don't think of them being into poetry. So he had this side of him that was just so removed from the competition on the court, because on the court he was very focused and very intense.
Well, you of course, you championship after championship after championship, and it starts just chain of championships. You get drafted in the first round of the draft, 11th pick taken that year by the Golden State Warriors, who was a good team, but there's no reason to think that your string of championship life is going to continue at that point.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I look at that team, and I'm still trying to figure out how you guys pulled that off. You know, obviously there were a couple of people who were pretty important in that, starting with one of our Bunn Lifetime Achievement Award winners, Al Attles.
Yes.
A remarkable guy in his own right, and another amazing coach who came into your life.
Yes, and you're right, Paul. There was no reason to expect the championships to continue. Going to Golden State, well, first of all, being from California, I was happy to stay in California. And it just so happened I spent almost every major holiday in that part of the country because both my mom and dad had brothers and sisters in the Bay Area. But Coach Attles, he had a remarkable career as a player in the
Absolutely.
NBA. And he was known as the Destroyer.
Mm-hmm.
And he was known for hard work and defense. And we reflected his personality. Of course, we also had the great Rick Barry,
Well, yeah,
another Hall of Famer.
absolutely.
But I think Al was real good. He was pretty easygoing until his voice dropped 3 octaves. And you go, oh, where did that come from? And then you knew you better pay attention. But because of his playing career, you knew that if things got too far out of hand or if you got out of line, I mean, he could deal with the situation.
He was a tough guy.
He was a tough guy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know Coach Attles, he had one of the most remarkable voices in NBA history.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, really,
And,
yeah.
and that wasn't bad, actually. That was pretty good, Al Attles.
That was pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. Before we get to Rick, who was an amazing player, I wanted to ask you about one other player on that team in particular, because his name has come up so often when I talk to guys from that era or different teams as just a really special teammate and player who a lot of folks probably don't know as well, a guy named Clifford Ray. Can you talk a little about Clifford?
Yeah, Clifford, he came to the Warriors in a trade with Nate Thurman, the Hall of Famer from the Warriors, and was relatively unknown, but he's the only player that I've played with in my career who could break down all 5 positions. And he was a big burly guy for those of you who don't know him, with Oklahoma and was from South Carolina. And he was a very menacing looking guy, but did he have a way with the ladies? Whoa. And they just loved him. And he was he was a gourmet cook. He was a musician. He had all these talents, but he was also a very, very, and I would use this word, brilliant basketball player. He and Rick Barry could run that screen and roll to perfection. And he would rebound and he would dunk the ball. He didn't have much of a mid-range shot, but he didn't need one. But also he was kind of the glue that held that team together. You had Al Attles, of course. You had Rick Barry. You had all these people. But he would go around and talk to each guy individually when he saw that we were out of sync or out of whack and try and get to the problem and help us get over it. I remember the first time I was a rookie and I was kind of struggling and we were in Chicago and he said, "Come on, Rook, let's talk." He said, "I'm coming to your room to talk." And this was before I really knew Cliff. You know, we were still in the getting to know each other process. Sure. I said, "Sure, come on up." And he comes up and he says, "We're going to go in the bathroom." And I looked at him like, "We're going to go where?" He said, "We're going to go in the bathroom." I said, "What are you talking about? Why are we going in the bathroom?" He said, "Well, that's where people are most relaxed." And, we'll let their hair down and talk about their problems, their issues. Well, after I thought about it, I said, well, that kind of makes sense. We're in a very, yeah, that's how I was like, wait a minute, big fella. But, we're in a very competitive environment. You get uptight, I mean, it's very delicate. You got all these great players with big egos, with everyone talking in their ear about this and that, and it gets real delicate. So anyway, I went in the bathroom, Paul, And he really helped me a lot. And I saw his technique, but he was real good that way and he would do it in a very engaging, fun way. I mean, he wouldn't say, hey, we got a problem, let's sit down and talk. He would make it fun, engaging, and you would spill things to him and get it out your system and you know, get past whatever your issue was with this guy or that guy or this thing or that thing. But he was great that way, Paul.
One of the joys of our game, of course, is the fact that it combines teamwork with individual brilliance in such a distinctive way.
Yes.
And you played with several of the most eccentric but brilliant players in history. You mentioned Rick Barry. Can you talk a little about Rick? And I mean, how great he was that year in particular, but what kind of a guy he was.
And you said it. They're very great, but they're also eccentric. You know, and I guess maybe to an extent we all are. I mean, we all have our nuances, but the second most question I was asked the most coming out of college to Golden State, the first one was, how are you going to survive the rigors of the NBA? Because I was kind of frail. And the second question was, how are you, a Coach Wooden protege, going to get along with a guy like Rick Barry? Now, I didn't know Rick at the time. I knew he was a great scorer, and that's all I knew about him. I kept wondering, why do they keep asking me this? And so I decided, and I had no choice, but I decided I wasn't going to prejudge anything because most of the major influences in my life, Coach Wooden, my dad, other gentlemen, they were open-minded. So I stayed open-minded. And Rick was something. He was a piece of work. Very intelligent, very opinionated, which most great players are. And we used to tell him he was in the wrong profession. He should have been a courtroom lawyer because he liked to argue so much. And the reason why they kept asking me why would I get along, how could I get along with Rick Barry was he was known to be very direct but also very critical of his teammates, publicly critical of his teammates, coaches, referees. And the direct part I love, I could deal with that, but you know, Coach Wooden would really frown down on publicly criticizing one of your teammates. But when I learned, Paul, that he was harder on himself.
Absolutely.
And when I saw that, he was harder on himself than any teammate or coach or, oh man, I mean, I already had a lot of respect for him, but man, I just shot through the roof then. And then we started learning personal things. He's very, he doesn't wear it on his sleeve, but he's very socially concerned and involved with young people. And so it began to blossom. And that year, in my opinion, Bob McAdoo was most valuable player of the regular season. How many of you remember the name Bob McAdoo?
Hall of Famer.
And he was brilliant. But to this day, and I played with McAdoo with the Lakers. I won championship with McAdoo with the Lakers, and I liked Bob McAdoo. But Rick Barry should have gotten MVP of the regular season that year.
I don't think people understood how they know about his scoring, but his whole game was so huge that year.
He was a great passer.
Yeah.
Everyone talks about his scoring, but he was a great passer. And I know I'm in Massachusetts, but I would put him up there, except I would give this other player the edge on rebounding. He was up there with Larry Bird. I'm sorry.
Speaking of eccentrics and making folks here in Boston happier about, you played with one of the great eccentric, remarkable, arguably one of the greatest players in the history of the game so often in your career, Bill Walton. Can you talk a little about Bill and who he was and what he meant to your life and your game?
Yeah, Bill, I love Bill Walton. Even though he's a Celtic, I still love him. No, Bill's a great guy. He's a smart guy. Well, he's a brilliant basketball player. Brilliant, I mean. And to this day, I have never seen anyone else rebound the ball, turn, and fire it to midcourt in one motion. I've never seen anyone do that. Now, Wes Unseld and Kevin Love come close, but they had their feet touch the ground first, but they pivot so fast. But he could do it in midair, and I think that set him apart. But he did everything well. And I think had he been 6 feet tall, he'd have been a very fine basketball player because he's a student of the game. So he was brilliant on the court. He was a lot of fun to play with because he liked to rebound and block shots. And
a great passer as well.
Great passer. Not only on the outlet pass, but in the half-court set, he was a real fine passer, great passer. One of the best passing big man I've played with or I've seen. Just a great player. But off the court, he was a lot of fun. And now, many people don't know, in college, he stuttered so bad, he literally could not talk. And so he would shy away from the media. People would, think he was antisocial, this, that, and the other. But for those of us who knew him, we understood he just couldn't talk. So it's more amazing to me than his basketball career that he's now a broadcaster. Because he had to overcome a huge mountain there, but he was a lot of fun. He was very gregarious. After practice, we go out, have pizza and drink beer or Coke or iced tea. Well, no, we spent all our time in the library, but
yeah. I should point out, anyone who'd like to ask Mr. Wilkes a question, we're going to take a few questions from you folks if you want to start to collect over here. But you talk about Coach Wooden. He managed to get the best out of Bill Walton and another one of your teammates, the legendary Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Yes.
Yeah.
The legendary Kareem. Two very different personalities.
Right.
Kareem, New York City. He was 7 feet tall before it was NBA cool.
Right.
And that's another thing about Bill. He never wanted to be 7 feet tall. He'd always say, no, I'm not 7 feet, I'm 6'11".
Right.
And I think he's 7 feet tall, but if he says he's 6'11", he's 6'11", But Kareem, yes, another brilliant, eccentric, very highly intelligent. He's a funny guy. He's a lot funnier than his public persona.
Yeah.
Very sensitive. And he could be aloof too. I mean, he could be moody, but
comes with brilliance sometimes.
Exactly, Paul. Yeah. And his sky hook is the most devastating offensive weapon I've ever seen. Now, Michael Jordan's jump shot, in my opinion, comes close. Comes close, but that sky hook, I mean, there'd be 2 or 3 players on him, and he would just, every time you knew he would make it when it counted.
Unstoppable.
It was unstoppable, and I'm really amazed that more big guys don't shoot the hook shot.
It's a mystery to this day, absolutely. We have some folks lining up here. I have so many questions we can ask. I wish you'd stay all day here, but why don't we ask our first young man? Come on over. Come on over. Tell us your name and your question, please, for Mr. Wilkes.
My name is Brendan.
Hi, Brendan. What's your question?
So what was your college coach name again?
John Wooden was his name. We were just talking about Coach Wooden. You have a question about Coach Wooden?
So what was it like being a professional basketball player?
Well, that's a great question, Brandon. Come here. How you doing, sir? How old are you? 8. 8, okay.
It's good to be 8.
It is. Being a professional basketball player was interesting. The first couple years, it was fun because you're traveling to all these cities and you knew people in some of these cities and everyone treated you like you were important. But after the first couple years, the travel becomes a job, staying in a whole different hotel, eating different food becomes a job. It's very competitive too. You're always looking over your shoulder, saying who's going to be next, trying to take your job. And it's a lot of money involved. So, but I feel so blessed and fortunate that I was able to do it.
Thanks for your question, pal.
Thanks, Brandon.
Come on over. Next one, sir. Please tell us your name and your question for Mr. Wilkes.
Hello, my My name is James. My question is, do you still got that wicked jump shot from the corner? I grew up watching you, so I know your game. I know the players that you played with, and you were great, man. I love watching you play. So that was my question. Do you still shoot that jumper?
Thanks, James, for your comment and your question. I do. I still have the jumper. What I don't have is the legs, but but I still have the jumper, and I don't play anymore. But once in a while, I just go out and just let some go, you know, just to feel, you know, just to feel it.
Feel alive.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. For you young folks, you should go home and watch on YouTube, look at pictures of Mr. Wilkes. He had the most unusual jump shot, exactly, which he developed in the schoolyards playing against much older guys than him.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. And I should point out that Mr. Wilkes has a book that's out that some of you might want to pick up and read about. He tells a lot of the stories about all these aspects we've just brushed through today, his remarkable, remarkable career to smooth as silk.
Thank you.
Exactly. Good. Next, folks, please. A Laker fan coming over here. A brave guy in Boston terms. What's your name and what's your question for Mr. Wilkes?
This is Samuel.
Sam.
What's your question? Well, Samuel and I, we're great Lakers fans, and if my math is correct, this is the 30th anniversary of your last championship in 1985. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
So I got to ask you, salaries aside, the game has changed a lot. The style has changed a lot the past 30 years. If you could play in any decade, in any genre of basketball or any specific team, when would you want to play?
Hey, Sam. How are you, buddy? You good? All right. I'm sorry. I didn't get your dad's name?
Adam.
Adam.
Hi, Adam. Thanks for your question. I would want to play when I played. I feel it was the golden era. And again, I may be biased, but as Paul pointed out, you know, I played with and against some really outstanding players. I mean, not just great players, but players that define basketball. And you know, I didn't play. I mean, I even got to play a bit against Michael Jordan and Larry Bird. I mean, these players define basketball, and of course Kareem and Bill Walton, John Wooden. So I feel so blessed and fortunate to have played when I did, and that's when I would prefer to play. And I think we could stack up well against any era. Yeah.
Thanks for your question. Thanks
Thanks
for coming by. Next, please. Canada basketball. I love it there. Great basketball tradition, too. And, of course, Dr. Naismith was Canadian.
Absolutely. Sir. My name's Nicholas Davis, and a huge Laker fan. Followed them from the 80s. I've seen every game you played since probably 81 until you retired. Huge fan. My question for you, though, is you had so many great moments as a basketball player. You won a couple of championships with the Lakers, played with some great players. What is your most memorable or most defining moment as a professional basketball player?
Thanks, Nicholas, for your question. It would be hard to pick one moment. People have asked me which championship team was your favorite, and my best answer to them is it's kind of like children. You know, I have 3 children, and they're different, but I love them just the same. Having said that, the UCLA and the Lakers, we had great players, great coaching, great everything. We were expected to win, and fortunately, we did win a lot. With that Golden State team, we were expected to be mediocre at best. I was a rookie. It's my first year. There were a lot of questions of, could I survive the rigors of the NBA? We not only won the championship, but I was Rookie of the Year. So I was really pleased this year the Warriors won it, and there's a piece of me, even though I live in SoCal, there's a piece of me that will always be there. I was born in Berkeley, so I still hold to my answer that I have 3 children and they're all special and I love them all, but that Warrior team was You know, it really catapulted my career in the NBA, and like I said, we exceeded expectations. It was a fun year. It's a good year.
Thank you. Next, please. How are you, ma'am? Your name, please, and question for Mr. Wilkes.
I'm Alice Johnson. I'm originally from Southern California, so I grew up watching you play at UCLA. But the most fascinating thing about you, and I think I speak for all the ladies, is your voice. And when we heard Silk, it melted us. And we also enjoyed seeing you doing some acting, and we always think about Cornbread, Earl, and me. And I just wondered, maybe one day we would hear you more broadcasting because we love that voice.
Wow, thank you so much, Alice. Boy, you flatter me too much.
That's not bad. That's not bad at all, huh? Yeah.
Not bad at all, yeah. Wow. Maybe I never actively pursued broadcasting, and I don't have any plans to. But, you know, I'll never say never.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate your comments. I mean, you know, wow.
Makes for a pretty good day.
A good thing my wife didn't hear it.
Tell I said so.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Thanks. Sir.
Bob from New Jersey. Just curious, I know the NCAA game has changed so much, the men's game. Do you think it's kind of an underrated streak in sports, the 88 win streak? And I don't know how you lost to Notre Dame that weekend.
I don't
Still
either.
upsets me. But do you think anyone will ever come close to that type of record ever?
Well, it'd be very, very difficult. I played on 73 of those 88 games, and number one, because of the one and done, I think that makes it more difficult because there's not the same continuity where you have where the coach knew he'd have a player 3 years or 4 years, and the freshman couldn't play when I played. But and the women already did it. Connecticut, yeah, they already did it. But in the men's game, I don't see it being broken.
And not take anything away from Notre Dame, because they won and they deserved to win that game. I'm sure they were great. They played like crazy that night, I'm sure. Wasn't Bill a little hurt at that point?
Yeah, his senior year, he was having, his knees would flare up and he was having back issues. But I get asked more about Notre Dame and the other game we lost to NC State. Yeah, David
Thompson, right? Oh, him.
Him.
Skywalker.
Those guys.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, sir. Yes,
Thank
sir.
you for your question.
Your name, sir, and question for Mr. Wilkes.
My name is Alonzo Lewis. Mr. Wilkes, my fiance over there, Kelly, kind of whispered in my ear to the point of playing in your era of basketball versus today. You know, there's a lot of civil unrest in that time, and a lot of players played for the love of the game back then. But now players play, the way I feel, is for a sense of entitlement. What do you think about that?
Generally, I would tend to agree with you. I think more players played for the love of the game, had more pride of being associated with their team, their community, and frankly paved the way for these young guys to start making a lot more money. And I think a sense of entitlement is very real. But I don't totally blame the players. I blame the owners and corporate America just as much as the players, because when I was growing up, you'd be out shooting balls, and my mother would say, "Sonny, what are you doing? Put that ball down. Come in and do your homework." Nowadays, it feels like if I was doing my homework, my mother would say, "What are you doing your homework for? Get out there and shoot that ball, or hit that ball, or catch that ball, or whatever it is, hit the pool, whatever it is." And I think that's part of corporate influence, you know, the big shoe companies and others that sponsor athletes, endorsements, all trying to get the next LeBron or the next Kobe or the next Larry Bird or the next, and so my point of the story is even the parents are caught up in that now, especially with the AAU ball. You know, that's, you know, and corporations are funding that, and the parents are more competitive than their kids because there is a lot at stake. I mean, they not only do they want to be the next superstar, but they just want a scholarship. And it doesn't have to be D1. So, and then globally, there's a lot more competition. So, yeah, I'd say in general, I would tend to agree with your statement.
Thank you, sir. Sure. You mentioned at the beginning that you kind of pinch yourself still when you come in here. Do you remember in 2012 when my boss, John, called you on the phone and said, "Got some good news, you've been elected to the Hall of Fame." What was your thoughts? What was your reaction?
My reaction, Paul, was very surrealistic. I remember I got the call, and I mean, I really couldn't believe it. It's one of those things, I don't know how to describe it for people, but it was almost otherworldly. It's like, you know, am I really talking to John? I mean, is this? And then I happened to be home, and I went down and had tea and coffee with my wife, and we just kind of sat there for about 45, 50 minutes and just digested it together. But you really don't get it till after it's happened, because the anticipation is really great. And then you come here, and everyone is so nice and fantastic. Is she here?
She's
Fran
here
is,
yep.
you know, doing her thing, and everyone is just so great. And it takes a while to digest it. You know what happened, and the appreciation, the level of appreciation that is shown is just it just meant so much to me and my family. Not only to be inducted, but to come back here and experience the fine hospitality that the Hall of Fame gives you. And then, you know, someone asked me, what was it like? And I told them, and I'm a preacher's kid, so I'm not being sacrilegious, but it's the closest to basketball heaven I can think of.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when and you walk around, and every display and every picture and it's just so captivating, and there's so much history behind it. And then you stop and you say, well, I'm in here.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why I'm still pinching myself, because I thought I was pretty good, but, you know, it's just, wow. It just leaves you speechless.
Well, you leave us all speechless with your stories. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in another round of applause for Mr.
Thank you.
Jamaal Wilkes.